You're standing in a forest. It's getting dark. The trees look the same in every direction. Your phone is dead. Or maybe you never had one because it's 40,000 BC and the concept of a phone is about as relevant to your life as a pension plan. The light is fading fast. Something large is moving through the brush somewhere to your left. And you are completely, absolutely, with zero ambiguity, lost. Here's the question that should be sitting in your stomach right now. What do? Your first instinct is probably to move. Pick a direction, any direction, and start walking. Do something. Because standing still feels like giving up. And giving up feels like dying. And your brain is running a very old program that says motion equals survival. That program is ancient. It is also, in this specific situation, almost entirely wrong. Here's the thing nobody tells you about getting lost. Modern humans treat it like a malfunction, a glitch in the system. You were somewhere, and now you're not, and the entire experience is coated in a layer of panic that makes rational thought feel like a foreign language. We reach for our phones, we look for a signal, we freeze, or we spiral, or we start walking in circles without realizing it, because without landmarks, our internal compass defaults to our dominant hand and curves us back on ourselves like a broken clock. But ancient humans didn't have that panic baked in. Not because they were braver, and not because they were tougher, though they were almost certainly both. But because being lost, truly disoriented in an unfamiliar landscape, was not an emergency to them. It was a Tuesday. It was just the texture of being alive in a world that didn't have road signs or GPS satellites or a customer service line you could call. They were not lost the way we get lost. They were temporarily without reference points in an environment they had spent their entire lives learning to read. And that distinction, small as it sounds, changes everything about how you respond to the situation. Because what ancient humans did when they got disoriented wasn't panic. It wasn't guess and move and hope. The first thing they did, the very first move in a playbook built over hundreds of thousands of years of hard experience, was something that would feel completely unnatural to most people alive today. They stopped. They stood completely still, and they started paying attention. Standing still sounds easy until you actually try it when you're scared. Your heart is going, your legs want to move, every instinct you have is screaming that stillness is danger, that the predator finds the thing that isn't running, that motion is life and stopping is surrender. But here's what ancient humans understood that we have almost completely forgotten. Panic is a resource. It burns fast and it burns hot, and once it's gone, you're left with nothing but bad decisions and a body that is already exhausted. So they stopped. And the moment they stopped, something remarkable happened. The forest started talking. Not literally, but close enough. Because the natural world is not quiet. It is absolutely saturated with information, running 24 hours a day, completely free, requiring no subscription and no signal. Wind moves consistently from predictable directions in most landscapes. Water runs downhill and collects in low ground. Smoke from a fire drifts in patterns you can trace back to a source. Birds go quiet when a predator is moving through an area, and they get loud again once it passes. The angle of sunlight shifts across the ground in ways that tell you exactly what time of day it is if you know how to read it. Ancient humans knew how to read it, all of it. Not because they were smarter than us in any raw cognitive sense. The brain you're using right now is essentially identical to the brain a hunter-gatherer was using 40,000 years ago. Same hardware, completely different software. They had spent every single day of their lives outside, in direct contact with landscape, watching it, moving through it, failing at it, and surviving those failures, and updating their understanding. The natural world wasn't background noise to them, it was the entire content of their lives. When a modern person gets lost, they lose access to their information system. The phone dies, and suddenly they are blind. When an ancient person got disoriented, their information system was still completely operational. It was everywhere around them. They just had to slow down enough to read it. This is the part that should genuinely stop you for a second. The reason ancient humans were so much better at not dying when lost isn't because they had special skills we can't access. It's because they had trained attention. Attention that had been sharpened by necessity every single day since childhood. They noticed things. They connected things. They had built, entirely inside their own heads, a living map of the world around them, built from thousands of hours of direct, unmediated experience. We have the same capacity. We have just spent decades systematically outsourcing it to devices. The hardware is still there. Nobody took it out. Look up. That's where it starts. The sun is the oldest navigation tool in human history, and it costs absolutely nothing to use. It rises in the east, it sets in the west. At noon in the northern hemisphere, it sits due south. These are not tips, these are constants. They were true a million years ago, and they are true right now, today, wherever you are standing. Ancient humans didn't need to memorize them as rules because they absorbed them the same way you absorbed which side of the road to drive on. Through repetition, through consequence, through a lifetime of moving through the world with the sky always overhead. But the sun is just the beginning. Shadows tell you direction with a precision that is almost uncomfortable once you know how to read them. A stick pushed into flat ground casts a shadow that moves in a predictable arc over the course of a day. The tip of that shadow traces a line from west to east as the morning progresses. Ancient hunters didn't carry compasses. They carried sticks and patience and the knowledge of what to look for. Two rocks placed at the tip of the shadow 15 minutes apart give you a nearly perfect east-west line. From that, every other direction follows immediately. Your phone does the same thing faster, but your phone is dead and the stick is right there on the ground. At night, the sky becomes something else entirely. Something ancient humans had access to that most Americans alive today have genuinely never experienced. A truly dark sky. No light pollution, no orange glow on the horizon, no streetlights bleeding into the clouds. Just stars, wall to wall, horizon to horizon. So thick and so bright that the Milky Way casts a visible shadow on open ground. Polaris, the North Star, sits almost perfectly above the geographic North Pole and barely moves while every other star rotates around it. Find it and you have North locked. From North, everything else resolves. Then there's water. Rivers and streams don't wander randomly. They flow downhill, always, toward lower ground, toward valleys, toward coastlines, toward the places where people historically built settlements because people need water to survive. Following a river downstream in an unfamiliar landscape is one of the oldest and most reliable navigation strategies in human history. It works. It almost always eventually leads somewhere. And then there's smell. Something modern humans have not lost, just stopped trusting. The smell of water before you can hear it, the smell of smoke from a fire, the smell of the ocean carried on a wind from miles away. Ancient humans followed their noses the way we follow Google Maps. Literally. Without embarrassment. Because it worked. The landscape was never silent. It was a map. They just knew how to read it. Here is something the survival shows never tell you. Ancient humans almost never got lost alone. This sounds obvious until you think about what it actually means. We tend to imagine the prehistoric navigator as a lone figure, reading shadows and following rivers through an empty wilderness, surviving on skill and instinct and sheer individual toughness. That image is almost completely wrong. Humans are not a solitary species. We never were. For the vast majority of our existence, we lived in small, tight groups of 20 to 50 people who moved through the same landscape together, season after season, generation after generation. And that group was not just a social arrangement, it was a cognitive system. Think about what that means practically. Every member of a hunter-gatherer band carried a piece of the map. One person knew where the river bent. Another remembered where the good flint was. An elder carried in her head the memory of a drought 40 years ago that dried up the eastern watering hole. Information that had never been written down anywhere, but was absolutely critical to the survival of everyone around her. The group's collective geographic memory was vastly larger and more detailed than anything any single individual could hold. Navigation wasn't the solo skill, it was the distributed network. Losing one person's knowledge was like losing a folder. Losing the group was like losing the entire hard drive. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities have documented something that consistently stops researchers cold. The spatial knowledge these groups carry is extraordinary by any measure. Not just landmarks and routes, but relationships between places, seasonal changes in terrain, the way a particular hillside looks different in a dry year versus a wet one, which animal trails lead to water, and which lead to dead ends. Children in these communities absorb geographic knowledge the way American kids absorb sports statistics, constantly, effortlessly, because it is woven into every story and every daily movement from the time they can walk. And stories are the key piece that almost never gets mentioned. Ancient humans encoded navigation information directly into oral tradition. Songs, myths, and narratives that sounded like entertainment were actually functioning maps. Australian Aboriginal songlines are the most documented version of this. Routes across thousands of miles of landscape, embedded in songs so precisely that you could navigate by singing them in the correct order. But this practice almost certainly wasn't unique to Australia. It was probably universal, because it solved a real problem elegantly. How do you store and transmit complex geographic information across generations without writing? You make it memorable. You make it a story. You make it something people want to repeat around a fire at night. The group didn't just keep you warm, it knew the way home. But sometimes the group wasn't there. Sometimes you were alone, genuinely alone, and the landscape around you wasn't talking in any language you recognized. No familiar hills on the horizon, no river you'd ever seen before. Light fading, temperature dropping, and the slow, creeping realization that nobody knew exactly where you were. This happened. It happened to ancient humans the same way it happens to people today. Hunting trips went wrong, storms rolled in without warning and scrambled every visual reference point in minutes. People wandered too far, chasing an animal, and looked up to find themselves somewhere completely new. Children strayed. Scouts got turned around. It was not rare. It was not exceptional. It was a predictable feature of life lived entirely outside, in a world without fences or roads or any of the artificial landmarks we now use to organize space. And here is what they did. First, they stopped moving. We covered this already, but it bears repeating because it goes against every screaming impulse in the human nervous system, and ancient people had to learn it the same hard way we would. Moving when disoriented almost always makes things worse. You cover ground, but you cover the wrong ground, and now you are not just lost, you are lost farther from where you started. The counterintuitive move, the one that required genuine discipline, was to stay put and let the environment give you information before you committed to a direction. Then, they built a signal. Fire. Smoke visible for miles in daylight, flame visible for miles at night. This is so old and so universal that it appears independently in the survival traditions of cultures on every continent. It is not a coincidence. Smoke is a broadcast. It says, "I am here," to anyone within range who knows to look for it. And in a world where your group was actively searching for you, someone was almost always looking. Then they found water and they followed it. Downstream. Always downstream. Because downstream leads to lower ground, and lower ground collects resources, and resources attract people, and people are how you get home. What they did not do is equally important. They did not spiral. They did not exhaust themselves running in random directions. They did not let the panic eat through their decision-making until nothing useful was left. Because they had been taught, from childhood, that fear is information and not instruction. That the feeling of being lost is not the same thing as being in immediate danger. That the landscape around you is still operating according to the same rules it always was. You just have to slow down enough to find them again. Every culture on Earth has stories about people who got lost and found their way back. Not because it was rare, because it mattered enough to remember. Here's where we come back to you. You woke up this morning and navigated. You probably didn't think of it that way. You moved from your bedroom, to your bathroom, to your kitchen without consciously registering any of it because the route is so familiar it runs on autopilot. You got in a car or onto a train and you knew, without really thinking, which direction was toward work and which direction was away from it. You felt the sun on a particular side of your face, and somewhere below conscious thought, your brain filed that away as directional information without being asked to. You were doing this constantly, every single day. The hardware that ancient humans used to navigate across unfamiliar continents in the dark is running in your skull right now, quietly, in the background, mostly ignored because you've outsourced the conscious layer of navigation to a small, glowing rectangle in your pocket. But here's the thing about outsourcing. The capacity doesn't disappear. It waits. Studies on people who spend extended time in wilderness environments without technology consistently show the same pattern. Within days, not weeks, people begin noticing things they had previously filtered out completely. The direction of prevailing winds. The way sound carries differently depending on what's behind you. The subtle wrongness of a landscape when you're walking slightly off a ridge versus directly along it. These are not skills being learned from scratch. These are perceptions being unlocked. The brain recognizing inputs it was always receiving, but never bothering to process because something easier was available. Ancient humans were not a different kind of creature. They did not have senses we lack or instincts we've lost. What they had was attention built by necessity into the finest navigational instrument that has ever existed. A human being fully present in a physical landscape with no alternative but to understand it. That person is still in you, quieter than they used to be, a little rusty, considerably less practiced at reading shadows, and considerably more practiced at reading screens. But structurally identical to the person who stood in an unfamiliar forest 40,000 years ago, took a breath, looked up at the sky, noticed which way the wind was moving through the canopy, and started walking with the kind of calm confidence that only comes from trusting a system that has never once stopped working. Getting lost is ancient, so is finding your way back. Both of those things live in the same place they always have, right behind your eyes, patient as the stars, waiting for you to look up.